Hey guys! How are all of you beautiful people doing? I hope you all are having a great day. And yes, this is the next part of I Became Shikamaru Nara. Where the world that once seemed fictional is now real. Shinobi, chakra. It's all so close. After being reborn in the body of a deceased child, the hero has a second chance to live this life anew. Having found a new home and clan, he will have a long and difficult journey. But the object that was found in the past and changed his fate is still with him. Now, with this power, he will follow the path of the strongest Shinobi. So without any delay, let's start the series. Deciding on this, Shikamaru reached the Hyuga clan at top speed. Unlike the past Uchiha, this clan isolated itself and did not mind this course of events at all. They may have aspired to an important position in Konoha, but they also did not allow strangers to approach them. In addition, they were not oppressed, therefore, with faith and strength, now this clan was considered the strongest in the village. The Hyugas are not very numerous and mostly devoted all their time to training. Although the clan was not huge, all the streets on their territory were empty, no worse than on the territory of Uchiha. Only special persons could enter their land, or at the invitation of the main branch. The Hyuga quarter was very similar to the typical aristocratic family quarter represented by all with old traditions and laws. Well-groomed streets and neatly located houses, no frills, but tasteful at the same time. Many dojos and training grounds were located between the large residences of various important figures of the clan. Silence and tranquility reigned everywhere. The Hyuga clan simply embodied the serenity and purity of Konoha. It is sad that behind all this was a blood-obsessed family, ruthless to their own descendants, especially to important heirs. Shikamaru had only been here a couple of times when he was researching the entire village to create a detailed defense structure for the village. As a last resort, such information can come in handy. Every time he visited this place, he admired the beautiful Hyuga garden filled with cherry blossoms. One sight of this place brought peace and tranquility. At the same time, catching up with longing and sadness. Only the desolate lands of the Uchiha could compare with this. Of course, there was no need to be mistaken, maybe the territory of the Hyuga looked so harmonious and serene, in fact it was a lurking tiger. Many Knin guarded the clan's lands hiding in the foliage, and this, not to mention the lurking couple of Jonin. After the incident of stealing the dojutsu, both parts of the clan, separated by a long street, were guarded by the Knin and Jnins of the main branch. But the divided lands of the main and side branches did not differ at all. The clan was united, even with this outdated tradition of keeping blood pure. Forged in constant war, Shinobi have come up with many rules to maintain the strength of the bloodline and the rule of the clan. There was no point in blaming the Hyuga for that. They embodied the essence of the Shinobi world, a monopoly on military power and complete control of this power. In their case, that power was the Bakugan. Without the utmost ruthlessness, they simply would not have been able to keep this gift. If not for the years of constant preservation of the purity of blood, the Bakugan would simply degenerate, and the family turned into dust. Seen from this side, the Hyuga is a clan of true Shinobi. In any case, Shikamaru did not come to enjoy the species. He came for a completely different. He is no longer that weak boy unable to get to the land of the Hyuga. Therefore, now he was just looking out for someone he knew. Hinata Hyuga trained in only one place and her current training was much tougher than in the past. Shikamaru had a significant impact on the girl. Although she retained the same kindness, she still acquired a bit of confidence and determination. Now she looked much more like the future head of the clan. Especially after defeating her younger sister. Unfortunately, even if she trained with the most persistent method, she still lacked confidence in defeating Neji. Since childhood, she no longer fought with him after that unpleasant incident. But, she knew, he was very strong, the strongest genius of the generation. Comparing with him and then defeating the goal is not an easy one. Every time she thought about it, Hinata always thought of Shikamaru, and every time she wondered how strong was he. Will he be able to match Neji? If so, how inferior is her cousin to him? Shikamaru narrowed his eyes and activated the power of his eyes. After examining several silhouettes in the thicket, he only shook his head. Using the Bakugan in the Hyuga territory, yeah, I'm a risky guy. Well, I'm not going to let her go so easily. If I have to leave the leaf, I simply have to leave my mark in her heart. I have probably already done this, but I need to take one more step. Who knows this fate? She can throw out something like that. With a slight laugh, Shikamaru moved. It is useless to use ninjutsu here, it will only attract attention. If this happens, the Hyuga will immediately activate their eyes, and without the skillful use of Ranmaru's dojutsu, it will not be so easy to get away from them. They are still jonins, and that's a problem. Therefore, one could simply bypass them. It was not so difficult to do this thanks to the Bakugan. But in any case, you have to be noticed. Hinata was guarded, and one unpleasant Takubetsu, jonin, did not take her eyes off her. Shikamaru had little information about the village's Shinobi, but he did manage to find out a few things over the years. Sometimes even Shinobi chatted, especially in a safe village, filling their mouths with food and drink. The Hyuga in this case is no exception, even with its proud nature. This Takubetsu jonin watching over Hinata is a master of his craft. Guarding and protecting the target is his specialty. Unfortunately for him, he was definitely not a great master in opposing strong genjutsu. Therefore, everything went a little easier than usual. Shikamaru knew that acting from behind could be dangerous. Jonin is jonin, especially the defense-focused Hyuga. Therefore, you need to make him lose vigilance. On the very edge of the Hyuga territory, not far from the head of the clan's residence, there was a small training ground. It was there that a short, dark-haired girl trained. Hinata had been practicing striking with the edge of the palm for almost an hour. Her hands already had noticeable abrasions from constant training, but she continued to strike with decisive perseverance on a strong felled stump of a tree wrapped in a thick straw rope. But, this time the princess of the clan was not alone here. Not far from the petite beauty, her younger sister watched Hinata with a carefree smile and continued to talk about something rather. In the shadows, a concentrated Takubetsu jonin watched the sisters. His task is to protect, he performed it in the best possible way. Shikamaru studied the area, waited after deactivating his eyes, then folded his hand seals and sent the clone to work. Wading into Hyuga territory is not entirely forbidden, rather, no one wanted to do it unnecessarily. The Hyugas could be too violent with intruders, even if they were from the same village. After the Bakugan incident, they became even more distant and suspicious. Don't bother the Hyuga, rather an unspoken rule. But, Shikamaru was not afraid. The Hyuga fighting style may be dangerous, but not for the owner of the absolute taijutsu ability. As soon as the Shikamaru clone infiltrated the territory of the Hyuga clan, the first to react was the Takubetsu jonin who was in charge of protecting Hinata. Noticing a short boy moving in the direction of the young princess, the Shinobi's eyes flashed with displeasure. He instantly moved and found himself in Shikamaru's path. If it weren't for Hyuga territory, he would not have intervened, yet he understood who this boy was and knew about his friendship with Hinata. But this is the land of his clan and no one just comes here without an invitation. Jonin was not rude. As soon as Shikamaru started walking towards him, the man simply said coldly, "Boy, you seem to have wandered in the wrong place. Go away, this is forbidden territory for you. Hinata-sama didn't invite you, so you don't belong here." But there was no answer. Shikamaru didn't seem to notice this shinobi and wandered on without stopping. When he walked past him, without even deigning to look, the Hyuga's cold nature made itself felt. The man grimaced and, casting a displeased glance at the guy's back, moved abruptly. He did not want to attack the child on the sly, but just wanted to teach him a lesson by hitting in the open. It would be a good lesson for him. When Jonin once again appeared in front of Shikamaru, this time all intentions were clearly visible on his face. He was going to drive out the intruder, and not in the best way. At the same time, Hinata and Hanabi finally noticed the ongoing skirmish. Only because of Jonin's back, they did not understand who he attacked. Therefore, the girls turned and began to observe what was happening with curiosity. The Jonin was fast, Shikamaru knew. This was definitely not the limit of his speed. But for a simple knin, this would definitely be enough. Looks like it was Jonin who knew something about Shikamaru. In general, to some extent, he was even polite at the beginning, but only now. With a light chuckle, Shikamaru dodged the thrust with his palm without any problems. Cloud's style was much better than Liz's against the Hyuga. Interesting considering some incident between Hyuga and Cloud. One way or another, Shikamaru easily left the trajectory of the blow and, surprisingly, Jonin, a counter-attack immediately flew in his direction in the form of sharp spikes that grew directly from his fist. The ninja's face immediately changed. Shikatsu. As a child, he heard many stories about the battle between Hyuga and Kaguya. Shikatsu was not in the last place there and was a terrible problem for Hyuga Taijutsu. It has always been incredibly difficult for a tanker to break through a bone and reach it. It was not worth talking about permanent wounds on the palms. Fighting such an enemy with your bare hands is terribly dangerous. It all happened in an instant. Shikamaru's fist was about to reach the man's ribs, as he instantly broke the distance and straightened up to his full height. At that moment, this experienced Takubetsu Jonin looked at Shikamaru with a completely different look. The Shikatsu holder is here in Konoha. It was surprising and at the same time suspicious. Plus, he decided to sneak into the Hyuga territory. All this made this shinobi become even more attentive to this guest. Shikamaru stopped paying attention to this ninja, and as if nothing had happened, he continued on his way to the Hyuga princess. The sisters finally noticed the guy. Hinata blinked in surprise. "Shikamaru. What are you?" Suddenly, the girl's face changed and shouted, "Beware!" The guy was already expecting this. Finally, his eyes filled with cold, and he growled angrily. "Field." Shinobi Hyuga no longer stood on ceremony. This impudent boy, who did not put him into anything, already began to anger him. He definitely needs to be taught a lesson in respect. Therefore, he attacked with all his might. He already knew Shikamaru was not that simple and would surely react. If so, it was worth seeing what this kid is so good at, since he dares so brazenly to go to the princess. Due to the too small distance, the Taijutsu master could overtake Shikamaru in just a moment of a second. But suddenly, the hayuga widened his eyes in surprise and realized that he was simply unable to move. His hand remained just a few centimeters from Shikamaru's back, and the guy himself turned his head slightly and said with a sneer in his eyes, "It looks like you haven't understood who is in front of you. It's interesting." With some anger, Jonin was about to answer something, but suddenly noticed a change in Shikamaru's gray eyes. At the same moment, locked in the field of shadow imitation, he suddenly realized that the world around him had changed beyond recognition. He is still unable to move, somehow influence what is happening. In the heavens, as if tearing apart space, a bloody moon appeared, and then eerie shadows began to appear everywhere. In the beginning they looked like people and beasts, but then, shadows began to grow. The light of the bloody moon gave them strength, their size and shape changed rapidly. The shadows grew huge claws, fangs, terrible limbs. In this disgusting silence, for no reason at all, the sounds of children's laughter began to cut through. The most terrible nightmares were embodied in reality. What is this? Jonin slowly began to embrace fear, and the more he succumbed to it, the deeper he plunged into genjutsu. He didn't even realize that in those dark eyes he saw the real Sharingan. Even having started realizing his condition under genjutsu, he did not have time to do anything. In reality, Shikamaru's real body was trapped in the shadows and knocked out this guard with a light blow of his hand. With a bloody flash, the Shinobi's consciousness faded. Shikamaru folded the seal, and the clone was immediately dispelled. With an unpleasant pain from the load due to the use of his eyes, the guy with a cold shine fixed his gaze on the defeated opponent. Using genjutsu from the eyes of a clone reduced the effectiveness by half. The load is not so bad. For that, it would not hurt to cripple him properly. This hayuga should know his place. Even though Shikamaru was angry, there was not a trace of anger on his face. It rather in itself did not look very friendly, and because of the grey eyes, few would definitely want to have a peaceful conversation with him. He repelled people in the past, but now he has reached the maximum of this ability. The two sisters, after seeing what they saw, could only stare at Shikamaru in surprise. It is worth knowing that the guy defeated his opponent in just a few moves. Fast and clean, without even raising the alarm, like a real shinobi. The guy's age and the pride of the enemy played a role. The hayuga did not expect defeat at all and did not take the enemy seriously. Naturally, had it not been for Shikamaru the Konoha ninja, that Jonin would have been more vigilant and would have informed the entire clan of the invasion for sure. And what shinobi could just walk through the barrier of the village itself? Therefore, getting close to Hinata was a little easier due to the peculiarity of the situation. Everything worked out as planned. Shikamaru wanted to remove the guards anyway, yet he did not come to Hinata just to conduct friendly conversations. In another case, he could arrange taijutsu sparring here, but all this could interfere with the case. Although, having a little sister was not included in the plan. Either way, she wasn't that much of a hindrance. Only after leaving the cave, Shikamaru had already made the first few moves before leaving the village. Whether these old people like it or not, why not get these lovely beauties, like a real hunter, in whose hands knowledge and strength? Only a fool will stand aside when such opportunities exist. With a leisurely step, Shikamaru finally approached Hinata. The girl looked all the same charming, and on her pale cheeks, as usual, flaunted this pleasant blush. Lavender eyes, slender upturned nose and shiny lips. Such a lovely flower of the hayuga family. Shikamaru was almost 2 heads taller than Hinata, and Hanabi was even more so. Winking at the little girl, the guy asked, "Beauty, can you leave me and my little sister alone? Even though this little girl was only 5 years old, even Shikamaru was surprised by her intelligent look. After the question, Hanabi chuckled oddly. Brother, you are so brave, are you not afraid that my father will come and punish you? Uncle Hayuri must guard us, and you beat him so brutally. Shikamaru glanced at Hinata, who blushed slightly and turned away. With a small laugh, the guy turned back to Hanabi. So you liked it? What I liked? The way I beat that uncle of yours. Did you like it? The girl giggled and nodded. Why, he didn't even have time to squeak as you beat him. I haven't been taught how to fight like that. Hanabi glanced at her older sister and turned to Shikamaru with a sparkle in her eyes. Big brother, if you teach Hanabi this technique, you can immediately pick up your older sister. What? Hinata finally let out a surprised scream, then sharply covered her mouth with her hand, blushing up to her neck. Hanabi was clearly many times bolder than her older sister, because she just shrugged her shoulders. So what? He came to you, so you'll chat. I won't tell my father and I'll even make my uncle shut up. In her last words, a playful spark flashed in the girl's sly eyes. She knew exactly what to do. Shikamaru finally looked up from the embarrassed Hinata's cute looks and turned to Hanabi. I'm going on a mission, and when I come back, I'll teach you Taijutsu super techniques. Trust me, no one in the clan will be your equal. Even your sister. Shikamaru rubbed his beard thoughtfully, then finally nodded decisively. If you train hard like your sweet little sister, then you can surpass her too. Hinata let out a strange squeak, which attracted 2 pairs of sly eyes from the chatting couple. But then both turned away at once. The girl rubbed her nose thoughtfully, then finally nodded. Okay. But remember, Hanabi has a good memory, don't look that I'm 4 years old, if you don't keep your word, you won't see your little sister, do you understand me? The way the little girl spoke to him didn't take offense to Shikamaru. He was rather even glad, so he simply held out his hand. Then that's a deal. You and your sister in exchange for tech. Hanabi giggled happily and carelessly shook Shikamaru's hand. Only a moment later, the smile faded from her face. Wait, you said? Shikamaru raised a questioning eyebrow. You don't want 2 strong technicians? 2. Hanabi's eyebrows suddenly tightened, she puffed out her cheeks and, trying to think about something, she began to nod very slowly. Okay. I'll believe you this time. Turning around, the girl, still arriving in a strange reverie, began to leave, paying absolutely no attention to the road. Halfway through, she suddenly stopped, turned her head and fixed a suspicious gaze on the grinning Shikamaru. Then she turned away and with a brisk step walked out of the range, straight towards the head of the clan's residence. The two were finally alone. When Hinata finally realized that there were only 2 of them left, she blushed again and turned away. Shikamaru wasn't embarrassed at all. He took a step towards Hinata, grabbed her and turned her towards him, and then pressed her against the training stump. The girl was definitely not expecting something like this, her eyes trembled, and her breathing went astray, especially when she realized what position she was in. Like a little rabbit, Hinata huddled into the collar of her jacket, trying to hide herself somehow. Shikamaru looked down at her with his piercing eyes. Both of his hands were on each side of the girl's head and did not give her a chance to escape. Just about to pass out from it all, Hinata firmly clenched her fists and met his confident gaze. She remembered, you can't give up, no matter how scary and embarrassing, you had to fight, because she is a ninja. and it was he who taught her this. Hinata just couldn't utter a word, but her whole appearance and face spoke for her, as always. Shikamaru ran a predatory glance down her pretty face with a smile and whispered. "You got stronger. I thought you'd hide, faint or pretend." Examining her clenched fists, the guy let out a chuckle and pulled away. He felt that she was at the limit. If he now even scatters in compliments or even tries to touch, it all ends before it starts, and leaving her here unconscious would not be the best idea. Therefore, when Shikamaru took a step away from the girl, Hinata finally exhaled and averted her trembling eyes. She continued to be silent, not daring to ask a question and find out the reason why he came here. Hinata didn't even know why this was happening to her. She hadn't seen him for so long, she simply couldn't see him, and now he is here, and his heart is beating so hard and there are no words to talk. There is no strength to even start. Shikamaru hadn't really hoped for such a reaction. He helped her in the past and then again in class. Since then, no one approached her and did not offend her. He was still different then, but he still made those bullies fear and tremble at the mere mention of Hinata's name. She needed confidence and she could only earn it as a result of her own victories. She must be ready to stand up for herself and not rely on others. It was he who taught her this then. During that first meeting in the park, Shikamaru changed a lot in this kind girl. But he really influenced her the day she was able to fight back the offenders. She was alone, she knew that he was watching and waiting for her actions. A strong spirit awakened much earlier than it should have. It turned out, she only lacked a moment of support. Since then, Hinata has a little more confidence in himself. She began to train even though she was tired. Now she just wanted to become strong, able to defend herself and maybe not even disappoint him. After all, he was so strong and almost unattainable. All this allowed Hinata to get closer to her sister, be more determined with her father and get the first lessons on the secret techniques of the clan 2 years ago. Even so, she is still not sure of defeating Neji. Pulling away from Hinata, Shikamaru put his hands in his pockets and said with a constant grin. "You are very beautiful, did I already say?" The girl hid her face even tighter in the collar of her lavender down jacket. It turned out to be exactly the same as in Shikamaru's memories. Only the girl was much nicer, especially with that flushed face. Since she didn't answer, Shikamaru continued. "Although I like to embarrass you, I'm not saying it for nothing. I want you to understand this yourself. You are strong, beautiful and you are the princess of an influential clan. It will be difficult for us to build a relationship, yet I'm a simple ninja, yeah." With a slight laugh, Shikamaru followed the girl's reaction. But she was silent and did not even try to look at him. Therefore, he just sighed and shook his head. "Tell Hinata, how can you and I be together when you're so embarrassed? I started this topic so that at our next meeting you could at least talk to me, otherwise it will be awkward." Shikamaru was silent for a moment, expecting at least some answer. There was not much time left. If Jonin wakes up, anything can happen. The main thing is that this sweet conversation will end. Since Hinata didn't want to speak, then. But when he was about to take a step towards her, the girl raised her head and, still looking away, whispered softly. I will try." Her face was looking at him, and her eyes darted from side to side. Hinata fiddled with her fingers awkwardly, but tried to hold on. Shikamaru nodded with a slight grin. "This is good, then maybe you'll even look at me after these words." Hinata frowned her small brows and with a gleam of determination raised her eyes to the guy, embarrassed even more. She now looked a little paler than a ripe tomato, Shikamaru did not push her too hard and stare excessively. He simply put his hand deeper into his pocket and fished a dark round ball out of it. Taking a step towards Hinata, he handed it to her, saying, "It will be useful to you. Eat it and you will become even stronger, but do not show it to others. Of course, it's up to you. If you accept, be prepared for unpleasant consequences. But the pain will pass, and your strength will definitely increase. Then your already good talent will surpass everyone in your clan, and by the exam you will become no weaker than Neji, I promise you that." With a satisfied laugh, the guy added, "Of course, if you continue to train and think about me." Hinata listened in surprise, examining the ball on the boy's pale hand, and after his last words, the girl looked away in embarrassment. "Okay, I said everything, do you remember?" Anxious Hinata nodded slightly, and then the unexpected happened. The girl did not even understand what was happening, as Shikamaru was again right in front of her, and her face was in his palms. With tears in her eyes, the girl realized the incredible, and then just lost consciousness. Moving away from those soft lips, Shikamaru licked his lips and grabbed Hinata in his arms. It was expected that she would shut down. But the first kiss of a cute princess is taken away, which means victory is in your pocket. More often than not, you need to show determination, especially when you are not indifferent to someone. It remains only to get rid of the body. Realizing how strange these thoughts sound, a wry grin crept across the guy's face, and then he activated the Bakugan, considering in more detail where the unwanted passerby might be. After making sure everything was in order, Shikamaru very quickly reached the residence of the head of the Hyuga clan. Right there, in the backyard, Hanabi was waving her arms and practicing gentle fist. At that moment, when she wanted to strike a biting blow with her palm, a familiar silhouette flashed right in front of the girl, and then immediately evaporated. Hanabi blinked in surprise and quickly looked around. Paying attention to the threshold of the house, she noticed there an unconscious Hinata. Hanabi immediately threw everything and ran to her sister. Once next to Hinata, the girl panicked. "Big sister, what's wrong with you?" "Older sister." At the same moment, a young woman dressed as a maid ran out of the residence. As soon as she found the unconscious Hinata and the frightened Hanabi, she immediately rushed to check on the condition of the first princess. After a couple of seconds, she smiled and shook her head. "It's okay, she just fell asleep." Fell asleep. Hanabi wiped away the tears that came out and said with surprise. But the older sister was." Realizing something, Hanabi frowned with displeasure. "Oh, this brother. It's all him." Made Hanabi cry, and also made his sister Hinata. "What did he do?" Looking into the serene face of her sister, Hanabi finally smiled. Hinata's happy expression said a lot. "Looks like he's not so bad." HPMF. Thus, Shikamaru decided his business with the first Hyuga princess, and then left the territory of their clan, completely forgetting about the small skirmish with Takubetsu Jinin. In fact, everyone else forgot about him. When he woke up and was convinced of Hinata's safety, he quickly reported what had happened, and then her father also received the news about the first princess. The situation was not in favor of Shikamaru. "That's just, his trace is gone." After finishing with Hinata, the guy decided to go home and quickly collect his things. He already had a task scroll, and it had long been decided that he would go to work. There was no point in notifying the authorities, especially Raizeenn. Now he will probably be visited by two beaten anew, and this is not the best reason to chat. Sometimes the old man could lose his temper, and then it would be possible to forget about the task. It would not be very reasonable to break through by force. Therefore, it was worth leaving while it was possible. He had already, delayed all this pumping. Returning home, Shikamaru found the expected scene. Mom cooked dinner, washed and cleaned, and in that order. Therefore, Shikamaru went to his room, collected all his belongings in a storage ring, and threw some into his backpack. He threw a black sleeveless jacket over his shirt, threw his backpack over his shoulder and went to his mother, having previously applied the transformation technique to avoid meaningless questions. It was worth saying goodbye before leaving and notifying at least someone. He knew about his changes and did not want to make excuses once again. Therefore, it is better not to allow meetings with the father, otherwise everything may result in an unpleasant conversation. Since Shikamaru had no intention of pretending to be a mouse, the conversation would definitely not work out. Fortunately, Shikaku worked forever. Entering the kitchen, Shikamaru noted the smell of yakisoba with a smile. I wanted to eat, but it was time to leave. Walking up to his mother, the guy said, "I'll go, Mom, I have a mission." "What?" Yoshino turned sharply and frowned. "Mission? Wait, already? Wait, where did you disappear the last days at all?" Shikamaru stopped and sighed in displeasure. Henga had to use it so as not to prolong this conversation once again. If it were not for his mother, he would not have used jutsu at all. But, especially to swear and argue with her, he did not want. Shikamaru still retains some respect. In this world, he spent a glorious childhood and had good parents. Still, he still felt like a part of the family, even after the recent changes. Therefore, he decided not to argue and lied with slight irritation. He didn't like to do that, but he didn't want to be rude once again. He was even surprised at his own thoughts. Usually he did not allow anyone to talk to him like that in the past, but here he even had to make excuses. A family. I was at KGS. Followed by a laconic answer. Yeah. Yoshino put her hands on her hips and narrowed her eyes. I saw Kji yesterday. He, came to visit you. You see, had hot springs. Are you wandering in the woods somewhere again? Or maybe he sat in the basement again? Shikamaru didn't answer, but just kept walking away. I went. Don't look for me, I'm on a mission. With a wave of his hand, the guy immediately disappeared. Yoshino stared in amazement for almost a minute at the place where her son had stood not so long ago. After another minute, she suddenly growled. Oh, you brat, well, Shikaku, what did you teach our son? Shikaku, now on a mission, suddenly flinched. Sitting on a branch, he looked around sharply, and then exhaled with relief. About an hour before the departure of Shikamaru. After the incident in the park, Ino returned home with a swimming gait. She still didn't understand why he did this, but the touch of his lips still gave goosebumps all over her body. A pleasant warm feeling in my chest just turned my head. All that Ino wanted was to sing and dance. She walked home in high spirits, even too high. People passing by looked back in bewilderment at the strange girl, glowing with happiness. Smiling brightly, she did not pay attention to the glances thrown in her direction at all. At the same time, Kiba, Kji and Naruto emerged from the alley and unexpectedly collided with the blonde. The girl did not even notice how someone appeared on her way. With a loud bang and a low cry, Ino slammed into Kji. The guy didn't even stagger, but his friend had to take a couple of steps back to restore balance. Oh! Ino, Hello. Naruto waved. Kiba nodded and the petty Shikamaru barked amiably a couple of times. The blonde herself rubbed her nose with displeasure. Kji's face changed and he took a couple of steps back, hiding behind Naruto. Evil Ino is not a very pleasant companion, he knew it firsthand. You see, Uzumaki also sensed something and looked at Kiba with panic. The same one grabbed Shikamaru and disappeared into thin air. Kji and Naruto exchanged glances and with wry grins turned their attention to Ino. It's too late to run. Yamanaka rubbed her little nose a little more, and then looked at her friends. A fat man in a grey sweater and a blonde in a bright orange jumpsuit. It was easy to find them out. Only Ino remembered Shikamaru again and ran away with a soft squeak. Kji and Naruto looked at each other once again. What is it with her? The blonde asked. Kji watched his fleeing friend thoughtfully, then nodded glumly. Shikamaru. Shikamaru. What are you talking about? Naruto asked in bewilderment. It's simple, Kji chuckled, not evil Ino, either happy Ino, or maybe all at once. Only brother Shikamaru can do that. There it is. Naruto nodded understandingly, and then sharply raised his head and smiled, look. Oh. Kji looked at another acquaintance in the distance. A blue shirt with a long collar, dark hair and a face indifferent to everything in the world. Sasuke Uchiha walked in an unknown direction, as usual, looking at the people ahead without much interest. He rarely went to this part of the city, but sometimes he had to. Nobody was going to cook dinner for him. Kji didn't even have time to wave to his classmate when Naruto found himself next to the Uchiha with a bullet. Sasuke immediately stopped and held out in displeasure. What have you forgotten here, blonde? NS. Blonde. Naruto sighed offendedly. I wanted to say hello, and you, as always. The Uchiha frowned, but then turned away slightly and muttered softly. Hey. Naruto immediately smiled and ran to his friend. Kji had already gotten close to these two when Sasuke began to fight off the pesky Uzumaki. The relationship of these two is not at all what it might seem. If Sasuke's friend number one needs to be pointed out, that answer is too obvious, even if he makes a displeased look every time he meets Naruto. Uzumaki himself always sticks to his friend and insisted on constant sparring and training together. Usually Sasuke had to agree, and lately he hasn't been against it at all. So these two became friends even before their graduation from the academy. Although the constant crowds of girls annoyed both. They made Sasuke nervous because of their loudness and annoyance, and Naruto for their reasons, sometimes even with envy, and sometimes with something else. In any case, these two did not try to beat each other as before. Naruto was not much different from the very Naruto which Shikamaru could call him, but training made him a little more confident and quite a bit raised his abilities to the proper level. Although, since then a lot of water has flowed under the bridge, and the blonde has clearly slowed down in progress due to frequent bouts of laziness. Only with Sasuke he could train, while alone it was given to him less and less. The lack of attention was taking its toll. The Uchiha, on the other hand, trained harder to surpass his annoying comrade. He may look dumbstruck, but he was considered one of the most talented students in the group, unless, of course, you consider Naruto's possession of Shinobi history, chakra control theory and many other subjects. In practice, he is undoubtedly one of the best. It was this that annoyed Sasuke. Some lazy fool bypassed him in the most important ninja skills. Naturally, the Uchiha remembered Shikamaru, so it's easy to guess who Sasuke still considered the unspoken rival in front. Besides, of course, Naruto. Kji walked over to his friends and nodded. Yo. How is Sasuke's life? It was fine, until someone showed up. The Uchiha flashed an irritated look in the direction of Uzumaki. The blonde smiled proudly, and Kji sighed. You, as usual. Well, then. Naruto grinned contentedly. Sasuke snorted in annoyance, but then decided to move the topic and asked. How is Shikamaru? Shikamaru? Kji was surprised. I thought you weren't very familiar. We met once. The Uchiha glanced at Naruto again. Uzumaki laughed and nodded. There was a case, then Sasuke and I decided to run, and then Shikamaru, well, I asked him to show some technique. Kji grinned. Did he run away as usual? If only. Naruto glanced at Sasuke and smiled. Someone decided to compare their abilities. Sasuke snorted, turned around and said. I have to go. Hey, I haven't told you yet. Uzumaki protested. Fuck off. Sasuke muttered. Naruto turned to Kji, looking at the back of his departing friend. Okay, I'll follow him, otherwise he'll be offended all week. Running away, Uzumaki shouted, say hello to Shikamaru. Definitely. Kji shook his head with a grin and turned to walk home. It was already evening, it's time to have supper. Distracted by the slowly floating clouds, Akimichi closed his eyes and smiled. What a quiet day, right now I would eat it properly, millimeter. Wiping off the running saliva, the guy quickly looked around and exhaled with relief. Suddenly, for no reason at all, someone shouted, and then a strange guy rushed towards Akimichi at great speed. A grey robe and a protector of list on his head, and a familiar face. But suddenly, the runner was overtaken by a green something, at an unimaginable speed. Kji jumped away from this pair of madmen in shock and pressed against the fence. Both swept by as quickly as they appeared, raising a huge cloud of dust behind them. Might Guy started training his new student for quite some time. Surprisingly, On Rock Lee grew by leaps and bounds in his abilities. Even Kji was amazed at the boy's speed. At the academy, they met, but did not intersect often. Shikamaru had already pointed out Lee's abilities at one time, so Akimichi remembered him. It happens. Shaking off the dust, Kji spat in displeasure, It even got into my mouth. Looking around, Akimichi found a crowd of surprised faces. Mostly there were only ordinary people here, but there were also a couple of jonin. For example, a man with a cigarette and an attractive woman with attractive scarlet eyes. Asuma followed the departing silhouette of his old comrade and let out a slight chuckle. He doesn't change at all. The power of youth works wonders, smiled Kyoinai. Kji distracted himself from these two and decided to quickly go home before another trouble happened. He certainly does not intend to be late for dinner today. That evening in Konoha, life went on as usual. Someone worked hard at the training ground, like Neji and Tenten. Someone performed a crazy push-up punishment accompanied by a strict teacher. Someone diligently counted their beetles, and someone took care of their dog with affection. At the same time, the happy Ino was taking a shower and humming a tune, familiar only to her. Sakura hadn't got out of bed for an hour and was staring thoughtfully at the ceiling. Far from here, in silence and loneliness, Hinata Hyuga accompanied the floating clouds with a slight smile. The day was slowly drawing to a close. The sun slowly hid behind the horizon and a long, lonely shadow stretched out in front of the gates of Konoha. A guy with a backpack was leaving his house with a light and confident step. Stopping near the main gate of the village, Shikamaru looked around. See you soon, Konoha. Throwing a last glance at the lively and illuminated street, the guy slowly set off. Ahead of him was a huge world and a cherished search for a goal in this new life. He finally became himself and, as before, had to find some meaning. It was worth starting with complete control of one's own destiny, and this requires strength and power. It was time to start. Finally, the village was behind. In the distance only forests and a path leaving somewhere in the unknown could be seen. The hidden village really turned out to be hidden when you look at it this way. A secluded and quiet place. The Konoha Shinobi settled well. Hashirama and Madara were versed in the area. In the middle of the forest next to a huge rock and a river channel, it is a very good idea to build a village in such a place. Besides, forcing the country to work for a new organization is another quite reasonable choice. Not that it really is as bad as it sounds. But in reality it was like this. The clans united and set conditions for the country. Not quite beneficial to both parties. Yet the power was concentrated in one place, and the daimyo and the country were obliged to both feed and maintain a military organization, which declared a monopoly on military power. As a result, the country and the daimyo became subordinates of the Hokage. In a rougher sense, they weren't very different from puppets. Naturally, they won't write about it in books. On this side, Hashirama and his supporters have benefited noticeably. Strength was deciding, as always. For Shinobi, things have become much better since the time of the clan wars. Now they could live like human beings. They just returned to wars anyway. They remained the same murderers and soldiers. As a result, the result is the same. Without integral power, peace cannot be achieved, and the more this shaky peace reigns, the more terrible the coming war will be. The economic balance will be upset, the next Akatsuki will appear and everything will be all over again. If the countries really wanted to coexist, then they could make concessions to each other. But who needs it? Countries are ruled by military dictators, army commanders. Since when did they care about diplomacy? War is in the blood of Shinobi, because they did not know development in another direction. Why let the sand take over the fertile land? Better to use other countries in wars and completely destroy their foundation. For a Shinobi like Tobirama, such methods are effective, and therefore correct. No wonder the Akatsuki appeared. If it hadn't been for them, someone else would have appeared. Thinking about different things, Shikamaru slowly planned the future. Fighting alone isn't such a bad option. If you achieve the power of Madara, then there is no particular sense in 1,000 other Shinobi and there is no point. In the past world of Shikamaru, quantity often exceeded quality. After all, it doesn't matter at all whether you have a machine gun, against 1,000 people, in the end, the winner is clear. In the world of the ninja, everything is different. From that, it made sense to acquire supporters, at least a few. And on top of that, Shikamaru no longer wanted to suffer failures, even the ones he caused himself. He did not regret the past, but he also did not intend to repeat the mistake of his death. Or maybe it's even luck, how you look. Thought with confidence still didn't seem very sensible. But having strong and loyal Shinobi definitely made sense. In addition to respect, supporters should have something else for their leader. Loyalty is not easy to obtain. Love, friendship, faith, you just need to push people. Supporters are needed and not from the weak. Shikamaru had plans for several women, and he had a whole clan living in Konoha. He didn't have much of a bond with Nara, but for some reason he still felt like the son of Shikaku and Yoshino. It's strange, but he didn't want to leave them and harm them. Therefore, alone you can try to go against the whole world. But why, when you can find people who share his views? Are there few who wish to protect their home? Few of those who want a world without wars? Thoughts appeared one after another. On a certain level, even becoming Hokage is not a bad idea. If Shikamaru faced an enemy of the village threatening her, he would most likely rush to defend his home. Not because of his love for Konoha, but rather because of the people in her, those with whom he knows. What have I become? It's all Raizeenn with his chatter about the will of fire. As if it worries me. With a scowl, Shikamaru took out a pack of cigarettes and then lit a cigarette. Waving a match and exhaling smoke, he grinned contentedly. But here I am more like Uchiha. I am more concerned with family and friends than a crowd of unknown people. Here our views diverge from the old man. Hashirama can still be understood, he built Konoha, but it's not so easy for me. Maybe all the Hokage have such a concern because of pride. Who would be happy about the death of so many subjects? Chuckling, Shikamaru continued on his way. Towards evening, with his leisurely pace, he reached a small village. There were only a few houses and a small tavern in it. After booking a room and paying, Shikamaru went upstairs to his little room. Slamming the creaky door, the guy turned on the light, sat down on the bed and looked around. The room was not very large, only 4 square meters, with frayed wooden walls and a small window with a round table. A small lamp on the ceiling and an old bed. But the sheets are clean, quite decent. Shikamaru had to live in worse places. Yawning, the guy threw off his backpack, out of habit, took off his shoes and took off his jacket, then sat down by the window on the edge of the bed. Looking out of the window at the starry sky, he involuntarily smiled, memories flooded. Yeah, I haven't walked so well for a long time. Such freedom brings pleasant sensations. I have money and weapons, just like in the old days. With a slight grin, Shikamaru stroked his palm across the table and slapped the soft pillow. Tanzaku in the north, 2 more days to go, and with my sluggishness, I can generally linger for another day. Well, not far from here Shukuba, there you can get hold of information. After his words, he mentally added. And it is worth getting rid of the tail. This Shinobi is not bad, but even he cannot hide from the Byakugan. If he knew about my abilities. All that remains is to escape, practice the techniques of wood release and finish off that annoying Shinobi on assignment. I wouldn't want him to carve out half of the city while I'm looking around here. Reputation is not particularly important to me, but since I got down to business. After it will already be possible to find a business for myself, there will be plenty of time. First, I will get rid of the tail on the way or already in Shukuba, and then immediately go on a mission with another yawn. Shikamaru lit a cigarette and proceeded to install Fuin seals. Installing Fuin may not have been worth it. Logically, no one should break in, but just in case it was worth ensuring. In general, an experienced Shinobi will be able to bypass these seals, but he may well miss long-range seals. They worked almost like a whole barrier ninjutsu, only it was not a barrier, but a special area for detecting the enemy. Completely invisible signal sensor. A very useful jutsu, and most importantly rare. This can only be seen in dojutsu, with the highest skills in sensing, well, or with special techniques. If the seal is found, the Shinobi will have to either break in by force or look for ways to get around. In the end, this is not a war, it makes no sense to be too zealous with defense. If the follower wanted to attack, he would have attacked a long time ago. Most likely he's here for surveillance. Either way, Shikamaru took it easy and then dozed off on a battered bunk. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. As soon as the sun rose, the guy was already shooting the traps in full and preparing to set off. The bright rays of the sun just cut through the low rooftops, and he was almost finished. Gathering himself, he threw his backpack over his shoulder, looked around and slammed the door. Leaving the building, Shikamaru caught sight of one of the nearest rooftops out of the corner of his eye, but not paying any more attention to it, he began to leave the village with a brisk pace. The path was not very long. After Shikamaru it would be necessary to walk a few more kilometers and reach the Tanzaku quarters, and there the city of Tumuru would appear quite a bit. It was in this border town that a dangerous Shinobi turned up, which had to be destroyed. It was not about the seizure by force and the extraction of information. The job is quite simple: hunt down and kill. The most suitable job for a child assassin trained in a special school for such situations. The residents of that town clearly wanted to get rid of this scourge as soon as possible, so they did not stint in the reward and did not deliver unnecessary problems with their requests. Experimenting with poisons or acids on living people is not pleasant, especially when there are no Shinobi in the village. It's funny. Some people have created hidden villages, and ordinary people now get into such trouble, and they also have to pay because of problems with another apostate, trained in a hidden village. For an experienced ninja, a place like this town is just a whole laboratory. Especially if he knows his stuff. The only curious thing is why all this is being done. A simple maniac. Maybe. This is generally possible, but then he would definitely be based in a big city. Although there was a greater risk of encountering Shinobi, but maniacs usually liked to attract attention or, on the contrary, tried not to do this and carefully cover their tracks. Here, the killer left corpses disfigured by acid right in the forest or wherever he had to. All this has been happening for a month, in a small town. There are not many corpses, but here it is clearly not just a maniac who tried to play his games. Kills indiscriminately, men and women, only adults. There are no clear signs of a connection between the victims. But, all this was worth finding out along the way. Due to the paucity of information, this quest mostly received such a high rank in rank. A long road in silence could bore many, especially if you were walking. Therefore, Shikamaru decided to turn into the forest and do his morning workout. He may be on a mission, but Shikamaru is simply not capable of the health-improving practice adopted from the Master of Youth. In addition, you can try to get rid of annoying surveillance and make another little deal with the system. Shikamaru did not know who was sent for him, did not even suspect. But the method of unexpectedly using the Sharingan has worked more than once, so you could turn it over again. As a last resort, you could always rely on the powers of the 8 gates and the Sharingan with Shikatsu for the perfect taijutsu. If you had the opportunity and skills, you could use new elements, but in this case it was worth finding easier opponents. Raizeenn would certainly not have sent a simple novice. This Shinobi is at least an elite jonin. Therefore, in battles with him, it is better not to take rash steps. If he realizes that his current method of tracking has failed, he may begin to hide even more thoroughly and will definitely become even more attentive. For the owner of the Bakugan, this is not a problem. But if the enemy constantly avoids combat and hides, it will definitely turn into an unpleasant confrontation. Then you will definitely need to use the speed from the 8 gates. Therefore, in order not to create problems once again, you need to act for sure and win. It was for these that the whole Shikamaru decided to go to Tanzaka, because it was not a particularly short way. But on the other hand, Along such a route it would be more difficult to calculate him. If the Shinobi loses track, then he can simply surrender. Mixing in a crowd in a big city was also real, but the question is which ninja is on the tail. It is very unlikely that there is a simple jonin without special skills, for sure he has extraordinary methods of surveillance and experience. As a result, it is definitely unwise to use unproven techniques. Losing can be costly. Although Shikamaru will remain intact, the follower will definitely not fall for it anymore. As a result, you need a clear blow and a complete victory. If only Shikamaru knew who he faced. Without even knowing who it could be. The guy still decided to play it safe. Fuin could have helped to pull away, but this is a temporary measure. He had no particularly useful seals to attack. Barriers are not applicable here either, and sealing and even more so. It is foolish to set traps when spying, because Fuinjutsu had to be cancelled. But, Shikamaru had something special. Going deeper into the forest, the guy threw his backpack to the tree, and he sat down in the middle of a small clearing, closed his eyes and mentally said, "Exchange." At the same moment, familiar sections with bloodlines, pills, elixirs and techniques appeared before Shikamaru's eyes. The latter were exactly what he needed. As a last resort, it was worth finding a jutsu to escape. A simple camouflage technique will naturally not help for a number of reasons. First of all, Shikamaru did not own it at a similar level, and most importantly, this jutsu only changed his appearance. It is possible to maintain a jutsu with its chakra for a very long time, but it is not so easy to get rid of the smell. Moreover, an experienced sensor, when in contact with the chakra, can track down a target even under henge, of course, until he learned this jutsu at the highest level. Unfortunately, this is not given to many. One way or another, Shikamaru was not going to hide yet. He decided to fight back, and as a last resort, find a way to confuse the enemy and hide in a special way. For this, a technician is needed, and besides, it was time to get them all ready. Collecting his thoughts, Shikamaru concentrated. I have always saved, but I think this excessive greed will not lead to anything. I have more than enough points of fate. In addition, I have almost completely chosen the path of development, therefore, you can now buy a couple of techniques. With these thoughts, the guy immediately opened a huge list of jutsu. Techniques. Main types. Ninjutsu. Taijutsu. Genjutsu. Subtypes. Fuinjutsu. Ioninjutsu. Kinjutsu. Improved types. Shikatsu Myaku. Willow Dance 30 Fate points. Dance of the Camellia 40 Destiny points. Dance of the Larch 50 Destiny points. Dance of Clematis, Vine 60 Destiny points. Dance of Clematis, Flower 60 Destiny points. Dance of Fern Seedlings 70 Fate points. Dojutsu. Sharingan. Izanagi 1000 Fate points. Izanami 1000 Fate points. Suppression and Control 100 Fate points. Bakugan. 8 trigrams Palm Net 50 Destiny points. 8 trigrams of Heavenly Rotation 30 points of Fate. 8 trigrams 64 Palms 40 Destiny points. 8 trigrams Vacuum Palm 30 Fate points. 8 trigrams Mountain Destroyer 50 Fate points. Dojutsu Ranmaru. Understanding 50 Fate points. Genjutsu 50 Fate points. Distribution of Vitality 70 points of Fate. Elements. Storm Release. Storm Release. Laser Circus 30 Destiny points. Storm Release, thundercloud in a wave 50 destiny points. Storm release, thunderous presence 50 destiny points. Storm release, blinding wave 30 fate points. Metal release. Metal release, supreme transformation 1000 destiny points. Adamantine transformation 500 fate points. Fusion method 200 fate points. Metal release, golem technique 80 fate points. Liquid metal 200 fate points. Metal release, snake dance 100 destiny points. Wood release. Wood release, birth of the sea of trees 30 fate points. Wood release, underground root technique 20 destiny points. Wood release, world of the wall of trees 40 fate points. Wood release, wood dragon technique 80 destiny points. Wood release, the world of flowering trees rise 200 destiny points. Supreme transformation of Buddha 200 points of destiny. Shikamaru immediately dismissed the not so useful techniques, including the Shikatsu that he could recreate. Basically, the guy only left the genome jutsu. In any case, even with the purchase of these techniques, he still had no intention of using them in the upcoming battle. Without proper experience and skill, the same wood release can play a cruel joke. In addition, without proper information about the enemy, it will be too difficult to build battle tactics. If this is a Buram with his special beetles, Genjutsu is clearly worth sweeping aside. Even with all Shikamaru's skills, confronting a member of the Aburam clan with a simple Sharingan will not be so easy. Naturally, it will be possible to slow down the enemy and try to deliver a surprise strike, but again it is not known how Raizeenn prepared this person. Using the Bakugan is also not a very good idea. The Sharingan will be more useful in battle, even without its Genjutsu. You should rely on Taijutsu, there is nothing more to think about. Even so, Shikamaru nevertheless began to intelligently buy equipment. They may not be useful for this battle, but they will definitely be useful in the future. After a few trainings, you can already release them into battle. After a minute, Shikamaru nodded. That's enough. I would love to learn the Flying Thunder God technique, so I had to spend some money. Yes, and skills in Cursed Seals on the Road do not lie, as well as interaction with souls. It all cost 5,300, not so bad, especially considering that I got the method of Orochimaru, the Flying Thunder God and the Chimera technique. Maybe I won't use them on myself, but it was worth using them as a basis for new jutsu. Yes, and I must take a couple of useful fuin. I have on my nose the creation of the supreme seals of control, suppression and release. For this, extra knowledge will not interfere with the same indifferent expression. Shikamaru got up and continued on his way deeper into the forest. In fact, with his new techniques in wood release, fighting in this more often could be quite a good idea, but who knows the enemy's reaction to the owner of Mokutan. Maybe he decides to immediately hide or something. In such cases, it was worth staying prudent. Most of the purchases came down to the most useful techniques. Although Shikamaru was quietly spending his glasses, he still had no intention of wasting them on useless items. The Shikatsu Myaku and Haijutsu Hyuga techniques were definitely one of those. Some can be copied, others can be simply recreated. As for everything else, there was simply no choice. There may be a scroll with the first one's techniques in Konoha, but go and get to it. In this case, you just had to make a choice and that's it. Another shopping problem came down to little information on technology. All that could be understood was a type of jutsu like Flying Thunder God technique, space-time ninjutsu. Even as such, the principle of operation was not indicated. Therefore, Shikamaru mostly relied on memory, and in some cases simply based on price and name. The obviously delusional technique will not cost too much, and vice versa. Only in Fuinjutsu there was a risk, yet there the name does not always correspond to reality. But, here, too, everything is not so important. Shikamaru only needed what he didn't have. He was not going to apply what he received. He needed a deeper understanding, that's all. Ranmaru's dojutsu also needed to be improved, and getting an understanding of all metals and getting the correct transformation was also worth it. The only thing worth thinking about was the Seal of the 100 technique. Shikamaru wanted to get it too, but the price and the chance to get it by another method left a chance for a different outcome. Therefore, Shikamaru has postponed it for now. At the same time, Kakashi, quietly following from the shadows, was already beginning to suspect something. Shikamaru was definitely not going deep into the forest for a pleasant walk. In an amicable way, it was worth temporarily breaking the distance. Only Kakashi was not afraid to run into this guy. On the contrary, he was not averse to seeing his skills. Therefore, the experienced Shinobi continued to keep the same distance and follow the target. At some point, Shikamaru suddenly stopped and with a light sigh threw off his backpack, straightened his t-shirt and looked around. Looking around, he calmly asked, "Maybe you will show up already. I do not intend to chase you throughout the forest. Let's solve it all at once." Shikamaru didn't bet much on this simple method, but he had already pinpointed where the enemy was. So it was worth determining the intentions. If he does not appear, all that remains is to try to break the distance or start a chase with the gates open. In the worst case, clone substitution will work too. The question is who is on the tail and is he ready to measure his strength? Raizeenn is not an annoying one, so he could well give the Shinobi a couple of instructions for such a case, and a little sparring can and is possible. For so many years, Shikamaru had already studied the old man's character well. After a moment of silence, the branches of a distant tree shook, and then a silhouette appeared in front of Shikamaru. The guy was clearly surprised when he realized who was in front of him. "Kakashi-san. This is the meeting." "Ha. And don't tell me." Kakashi smiled as usual, still holding his hands in his pockets. Shikamaru did not hide this, so he immediately asked, "Do you intend to fight?" Jonin shrugged. "I guess I have no choice. I am not a fan of surveillance, so if you win, I will immediately lag behind." "So the old man told you to check on me?" The guy grinned. "It looks like him." "Well, he's your teacher, you know better." Shikamaru just nodded, grabbed a kunai and got into a stance. Kakashi immediately smiled with his only open eye. He understood everything without further ado. Just a moment and at top speed, the two Shinobi collided. The clang of steel announced the clash of the two kunai, and then the legs and fists went into action. Without any ninjutsu, the two compared their skills in taijutsu. Shikamaru was still slightly shorter than Kakashi, so the shortness of his limbs markedly reduced the chances of an equal opposition. But, he continued, it is important to distract the enemy and then use the established control method. It worked with other jonin, and there may be a chance here. But Kakashi is not a simple jonin, not a simple one at all. Collecting his thoughts, Shikamaru concentrated. I have always saved, but I think this excessive greed will not lead to anything. I have more than enough points of fate. In addition, I have almost completely chosen the path of development, therefore, you can now buy a couple of techniques. With these thoughts, the guy immediately opened a huge list of jutsu techniques. Main types: ninjutsu, taijutsu, genjutsu. Subtypes: fuinjutsu, ioninjutsu, kinjutsu. Improved types: shikatsu myaku, willow dance 30 fate points, dance of the camellia 40 destiny points, dance of the larch 50 destiny points, dance of clematis vine 60 destiny points, dance of clematis flower 60 destiny points, dance of fern seedlings 70 fate points. Dojutsu Sharingan is on Agi 1000 fate points, is on Army 1000 fate points, suppression and control 100 fate points. Bakugan 8 trigrams palm net 50 destiny points, 8 trigrams of heavenly rotation 30 points of fate, 8 trigrams 64 palms 40 destiny points, 8 trigrams vacuum palm 30 fate points, 8 trigrams mountain destroyer 50 fate points. Dojutsu Ranmaru understanding 50 fate points, genjutsu 50 fate points, distribution of vitality 70 points of fate. Elements: storm release, laser circus 30 destiny points, storm release, thundercloud in a wave 50 destiny points, storm release, thunderous presence 50 destiny points, storm release, blinding wave 30 fate points. Metal release, supreme transformation 1000 destiny points, adamantine transformation 500 fate points, fusion method 200 fate points. Metal release, golem technique 80 fate points, liquid metal 200 fate points. Metal release, snake dance 100 destiny points. Wood release, birth of the sea of trees 30 fate points. Wood release, underground root technique 20 destiny points. Wood release, world of the wall of trees 40 fate points. Wood release, wood dragon technique 80 destiny points. Wood release, the world of flowering trees rise 200 destiny points. Supreme transformation of Buddha 200 points of destiny. Shikamaru immediately dismissed the not so useful techniques, including the shikatsu myaku that he could recreate. Basically, the guy only left the genome jutsu. In any case, even with the purchase of these techniques, he still had no intention of using them in the upcoming battle. Without proper experience and skill, the same wood release can play a cruel joke. In addition, without proper information about the enemy, it will be too difficult to build battle tactics. If this is a Buram with his special beetles, genjutsu is clearly worth sweeping aside. Even with all Shikamaru's skills, confronting a member of the Aburam clan with a simple Sharingan will not be so easy. Naturally, it will be possible to slow down the enemy and try to deliver a surprise strike, but again it is not known how Raizeenn prepared this person. Using the Bakugan is also not a very good idea. The Sharingan will be more useful in battle, even without its genjutsu. You should rely on taijutsu, there is nothing more to think about. Even so, Shikamaru nevertheless began to intelligently buy equipment. They may not be useful for this battle, but they will definitely be useful in the future. After a few trainings, you can already release them into battle. After a minute, Shikamaru nodded. That's enough. I would love to learn the Flying Thunder God technique, so I had to spend some money. Yes, and skills in Cursed Seals on the Road Do Not Lie, as well as interaction with souls. It all cost 5,300, not so bad. especially considering that I got the method of Orochimaru, the flying thunder god and the chimera technique. Maybe I won't use them on myself, but it was worth using them as a basis for new jutsu. Yes, and I must take a couple of useful fuin. I have on my nose the creation of the supreme seals of control, suppression and release. For this, extra knowledge will not interfere with the same indifferent expression. Shikamaru got up and continued on his way deeper into the forest. In fact, with his new techniques inward release, fighting in this more often could be quite a good idea, but who knows the enemy's reaction to the owner of Mokutan? Maybe he decides to immediately hide or something. In such cases, it was worth staying prudent. Most of the purchases came down to the most useful techniques. Although Shikamaru was quietly spending his glasses, he still had no intention of wasting them on useless items. The Shikatsu Myaku and Haijutsu Hyuga techniques were definitely one of those. Some can be copied, others can be simply recreated. As for everything else, there was simply no choice. There may be a scroll with the first one's techniques in Konoha, but go and get to it. In this case, you just had to make a choice and that's it. Another shopping problem came down to little information on technology. All that could be understood was a type of jutsu like flying thunder god technique, space-time ninjutsu. Even as such, the principle of operation was not indicated. Therefore, Shikamaru mostly relied on memory, and in some cases simply based on price and name. The obviously delusional technique will not cost too much, and vice versa. Only in Fuinjutsu there was a risk, yet there the name does not always correspond to reality. But, here, too, everything is not so important. Shikamaru only needed what he didn't have. He was not going to apply what he received. He needed a deeper understanding, that's all. Ranmaru's dojutsu also needed to be improved, and getting an understanding of all metals and getting the correct transformation was also worth it. The only thing worth thinking about was the Seal of the 100 technique. Shikamaru wanted to get it too, but the price and the chance to get it by another method left a chance for a different outcome. Therefore, Shikamaru has postponed it for now. At the same time, Kakashi, quietly following from the shadows, was already beginning to suspect something. Shikamaru was definitely not going deep into the forest for a pleasant walk. In an amicable way, it was worth temporarily breaking the distance. Only Kakashi was not afraid to run into this guy. On the contrary, he was not averse to seeing his skills. Therefore, the experienced Shinobi continued to keep the same distance and follow the target. At some point, Shikamaru suddenly stopped and with a light sigh threw off his backpack, straightened his t-shirt and looked around. Looking around, he calmly asked, "Maybe you will show up already. I do not intend to chase you throughout the forest. Let's solve it all at once." Shikamaru didn't bet much on this simple method, but he had already pinpointed where the enemy was. So it was worth determining the intentions. If he does not appear, all that remains is to try to break the distance or start a chase with the gates open. In the worst case, clone substitution will work too. The question is who is on the tail and is he ready to measure his strength? Raizeenn is not an annoying one, so he could well give the Shinobi a couple of instructions for such a case, and a little sparring can and is possible. For so many years, Shikamaru had already studied the old man's character well. After a moment of silence, the branches of a distant tree shook, and then a silhouette appeared in front of Shikamaru. The guy was clearly surprised when he realized who was in front of him. "Kakashi-san. This is the meeting." "Ha. And don't tell me." Kakashi smiled as usual, still holding his hands in his pockets. Shikamaru did not hide this, so he immediately asked. Do you intend to fight? Jonin shrugged. I guess I have no choice. I am not a fan of surveillance, so if you win, I will immediately lag behind. So the old man told you to check on me. The guy grinned. It looks like him. Well, he's your teacher, you know better. Shikamaru just nodded, grabbed a kunai and got into a stance. Kakashi immediately smiled with his only open eye. He understood everything without further ado. Just a moment and at top speed, the two shinobi collided. The clang of steel announced the clash of the two kunai, and then the legs and fists went into action. Without any ninjutsu, the two compared their skills in taijutsu. Shikamaru was still slightly shorter than Kakashi, so the shortness of his limbs markedly reduced the chances of an equal opposition. But, he continued, it is important to distract the enemy and then use the established control method. It worked with other jonin, and there may be a chance here. But Kakashi is not a simple jonin, not a simple one at all. The leaf style, grouped with the cloud style, performed quite well. No one had used their dojutsu yet, but Shikamaru was already noticeably crowded. It was not only Kakashi's immense skills and experience that affected, but also the length of his limbs. In battle, this meant a lot, especially against two approximately equal opponents. With another clash of elbows, there was a clap and Shikamaru hit in the liver. Breaking the distance, the guy threw out a kunai, which Kakashi immediately intercepted and threw along with his in the direction of Shikamaru. The guy jerked and easily avoided the kunai in the head. Trying to close the distance with a jerk, Shikamaru threw a leg into Kakashi's stomach. He easily grabbed the foot and tried to knock the guy to the ground. Shikamaru reacted immediately, and after completing a full horizontal rotation in the air, he struck with his second leg. Another clap was clearly in line with expectations. Kakashi blocked everything. The experienced shinobi's gaze flashed. At the same moment Shikamaru folded the seals and a shadow clone flew out of the cloud of smoke, followed by another. Kakashi frowned and broke the distance with a quick movement. At the same moment, the feeling of danger made itself felt. Kakashi reflexively dodged the side, and then an explosion thundered. Explosive. Hatake suddenly narrowed his eyes. The seal turned out to be not just explosive, but light. The dazzling glow almost burned my vision, from which I even had to cover my eyes with my palm. At the same time, Shikamaru folded several hand seals and shadows shot out in all directions. Kakashi knew now was not the time to squint and be inactive. Shikamaru turned out to be a dangerous enemy, and with the Nara clan shinobi it is not worth standing still. The swift shadows easily skirted several trees and, under the influence of the bright glow, rushed towards Kakashi's surroundings. A jump, and Hatake came to a vertical stop on a tree trunk. The shadows were already catching up. As soon as he noticed them, the experienced jonin folded the seal and moved abruptly. Shikamaru instantly dispelled the jutsu and dodged the kick. Catching on the shadows was not so easy. The opponent's chakra control was very impressive, plus he was determined not to stay on the ground and was able to use the position to determine the shadows. From a height, the view was completely different, and this was all even without the Sharingan. Experienced jonin in business is not at all easy. More on simple taijutsu Shikamaru was not going to waste. One movement and the first from the gate immediately activated, a volley of bones flew into Kakashi. The fight finally got serious. Dodging a dozen shells, Kakashi was surprised to find Shikamaru next to him. His fist, covered in sharp bones, cut through the air mercilessly. Guy. Found someone to teach, damn. With a slight grin, Kakashi could only put out his hands to block. With unpleasant pain, Hatake was thrown aside. But Shikamaru was not going to give him the opportunity to act. Kakashi knew this, so even with his bleeding hands, he abruptly lifted the protector from his left eye. Now is not the time to save energy, the boy is not one of the weaklings. The first gate allowed Kakashi to equalize in speed, but the Sharingan gave Kakashi even more advantage. Even as Shikamaru crossed over to the third gate, Kakashi calmly blocked every blow. Although, calling it a calm defense is not entirely correct. Still, the power of the Shinobi under the gate is no joke, especially if he has Shikatsumiyaku in reserve. Therefore, one had only to imagine what happened to Kakashi in just a couple of minutes of this taijutsu. Ha! Ha! Breathing heavily, Hatake broke the distance with Shikamaru again. The guy didn't chase him this time. It is not difficult to guess who had an undeniable advantage in this short battle. Kakashi's arms and legs were painfully shaking and bleeding from hundreds of different scratches. If everything continues like this, then he will lose anyway. Even possession of the Sharingan did not save one from constant wounds from sharp bones. It is not so easy to calculate all the grey bones suddenly escaping from the body for dojutsu. It's hard to imagine what the fight will boil down to when Shikamaru uses the rest of the gate. Kakashi felt more and more respect for this young genius. He was not arrogant or too arrogant. When Kakashi tried to catch him on a mistake, Shikamaru got caught only a couple of times, but always with a minimum of damage. Serious, collected, ruthless. Fighting spirit was ablaze, but Shikamaru did not allow him to turn his head. This meant that he treated the enemy with great caution. Kakashi had to admit that when he was this guy from the Nara clan, he behaved very differently. He was sure of his talent and part of it could play a cruel joke with him. Because of his father and subsequent events, Kakashi trained in the most persistent way. Paired with talent, he was able to achieve a lot. He even decided to leave the academy in order to prove himself and to prove to everyone what the son of White Fang is in business. When Kakashi jumped back, Shikamaru stopped. In this fight, he received a couple of bruises, but nothing particularly serious. Maintaining the gate and fighting intense combat is no problem at all for Uzumaki of Senju bloodline. In addition, Shikamaru did not even use all the possibilities of the gate, and Kakashi is already in a similar position. The guy was even surprised by this outcome. Using the Sharingan for a long time and exchanging taijutsu with the owner of the Shikatsumiyaku is not a good idea. So the question was, why doesn't Kakashi use his strongest moves? As strong as Shikamaru is, his bones will certainly not be able to block Chidori. In this case, he wanted to rely on the Sharingan for a sharp impact on the enemy. At worst, Raizeenn, but somehow Kakashi hesitated. It was as if he was not going to use this ability. To the guy's even greater surprise, Hatake rubbed his forearms with a painful look and chuckled. "You're not bad. Now I understand why this ability is called the best in taijutsu. The constant accumulation of even small scratches not only puts pressure on the body, but also on the mind. When you're the only one shedding blood, and you're constantly in pain, it's overwhelming. In taijutsu, spirit and determination are important. As soon as it shakes, failure is inevitable." Shikamaru deactivated the gate and nodded thoughtfully. "Frankly, I somehow did not think about it. Thanks. Thanks. Ha, what's there, don't thank. This I need to thank you. Such an experience. You helped me a lot. It's rare to be able to use the Sharingan for so long. After his words, Kakashi covered his eye with a protector, and Shikamaru finally looked at him. All this time, he tried not to maintain clear eye contact. In fact, Kakashi is the same thing, he focused more on the fight, and not on looking at the opponent's face. Kakashi just smiled and sat down, leaning his back against a tree trunk. Guy taught you well. Even without Shikatsu Myaku, your taijutsu is something with something. In my time, I would not be your opponent. Although, I'm no longer your opponent. The new generation is impressive. You are exaggerating. Shikamaru smiled and, being next to Hatake, bent down and placed his palm on his right hand. Jonin didn't try to resist. The emerald glow was immediately reflected in Shikamaru's dark eyes. Hatake smiled again. Thank you, stretching out his left hand, he asked. Dirny. Shikamaru immediately understood what was the matter and shook Kakashi's pinky with a light movement. With a crisp crunch, the finger returned to its original color. A few minutes later, most of Hatake's injuries had healed. The young man stepped aside and bowed slightly. I was glad to meet Kakashi-san, I hope there won't be any more. Ha, not today. Leaning on a tree, Jonin got up. You better tell me why you didn't use the rest of the gates. In response to the guy's surprised look, Hatake chuckled. This is Guy, he likes to shake up. Well, you bet. Shikamaru's lips stretched out in a slight grin. I didn't use the gate. Well, maybe for the same reason as you. You didn't use Chidori or summoning, that's not to mention the rest of the techniques. Interesting. Kakashi flexed his shoulders and said, there are abilities that should not be used against friends. Do you understand what I mean? Maybe. Turning around, Hatake jumped from a meter-long root of a tree and waved his hand goodbye. Be careful. You can stand up for yourself, but once again do not shine your abilities. Shikamaru said nothing. He already knows how to hide skills, even in this battle he did not show everything. As soon as Kakashi disappeared into the distance, the guy here the hedgehog activated the Bakugan and followed it even further. When Dojutsu could not detect the Shinobi, the guy exhaled with relief and returned to his backpack. After a small clash between the two ninja, the trees in the area were noticeably damaged. Some were even uprooted, and some even turned into dust. For the owner of Mokuton, such a sight seemed a little depressing. That is why, Shikamaru decided not to leave this place yet. Once the opportunity has arisen, you can test your strength again. One hand seal and a dozen clones separated from Shikamaru's body. To begin with, it was worth checking the transformation of metals. Clones were best suited for this. Toxic species could harm the main body, but if you use clones, you can not only speed up the acquisition of the necessary experience, but also protect yourself. Deciding on this, Shikamaru began training. Chakra was quite enough to check the transformations at the proper level. Naturally, fatigue will be transmitted to the main body, but any poisons and vapors in this case will naturally not work. Starting with the simplest metals, the guy quickly made his way to more complex and dangerous ones. The higher the atomic mass, the more difficult the transformation and the greater the cost of chakra. In this case, metal release turned out to be quite stable and balanced. The metals turned out to be much less than Shikamaru had originally anticipated. It turned out to be impossible to create unstable isotopes at the moment, and the number of stable isotopes that he could repeat clearly did not match Shikamaru's memories. In his past world, there were many more types of metals, among which are not stable, but with a long decay. But in this world, the past owners of the element did not go so far into the transformation and did not discover some of the chemical elements. Perhaps they didn't try, or identifying new species is more difficult than it sounds. Shikamaru was leaning towards the latter option. Even having received so many possible transformations, he still did not really understand how to identify new ones. In addition, even working with the current species and the correct distribution of chakra is no longer an easy task. A person with a weak chakra and body, with poor memorization abilities, simply cannot remember much, let alone create jutsu even more so. Working with isotopes is not at all what Shikamaru understood. He did not even know much of the use of all current metals. Perhaps a chemist could figure out how to use the element as profitably as possible, but in his case, everything is much more complicated. The most he remembered was the reaction of alkali metals like potassium with water. The hardness of chromium, the strength of titanium, and the heaviness of osmium. Simply put, he knew the basics. Perhaps, if you delve into the memories, something can be caught, like the magnetic properties of neodymium, but this is a matter of time. In addition, the cherished desire to get Uranus turned out to be impossible, since the last available metal is bismuth. This meant that all actinides were simply blocked at the moment, and damage was still very, very far away, not to mention plutonium. Further transformations are impossible, you will have to figure it out yourself. Although, this is not such a loss, even these metals are quite enough for many things. In addition, the possession of Uranus will allow you to create simply terrifying things. If he had Shikamaru, and in a moment he would have turned into one of the strongest Shinobi in the world. What is just a simple uranium dust capable of killing everything in its path? It is many times easier to transform a ready-made substance with the help of chakra, especially if it is metal. But to give the chakra itself a spontaneous metallic property is not so expensive with the volumes of Shikamaru. The difficulty was only new transformations, at the same time similar, but also different at certain points. The training turned out to be interesting and informative. As a result, most of the forest was filled with many metal structures, several scorched zones covered with poisonous fumes, an entire crystal zone of bismuth and even a golden hemisphere. Not far from the main body of Shikamaru, one could even make out a whole puddle of mercury, but the clone quickly figured it out, plunging all the poisonous elements deeper into the ground. It was not advisable to leave everything like that. The clones scattered, and after that Shikamaru got a decent amount of fatigue, a lot of useful knowledge and a decent amount of ideas for creating new jutsu. The main acquisition, perhaps, remained the ability to create a unique type of metal with huge mergers of the yang elements, adamantium. Its strength and flexibility were impressive, and its rather light weight is definitely one of the most important advantages. Chakra conductivity, sharpness, this metal is simply made for forging. Only the chakra costs were amazing. In general, the higher the atomic mass and the complexity of transformation, the more chakra is required to create a certain type of metal. A simple example is the conversion of iron into gold. The costs are decent. Of course, everything depends on the size of the structure. Converting iron to tin is much easier. 100 kilograms of gold made of iron will easily use up the reserves of an ordinary knin, and 100 kilograms of tin made of iron will cut costs in half. Naturally, if you create metal from chakra, the costs are even higher. In this case, the adamantine dome was several times the cost of creating hundreds of Raizeenn, if not more. In general, if you look at the benefits of such a metal, the costs are not so high. At the moment, a spear made of adamantium, even for Shikamaru, is considered worthy of chakra cost. Not like a Raizeenn for Kakashi, of course, but roughly like a good ninjutsu for Jonin. So it's definitely not possible to create 100 copies here, and a one-piece adamantine dome will generally cost him a third of the total reserve. The costs were impressive, and the strength and flexibility of this metal were mind-boggling. Thanks to this, it is possible to reduce the cost of chakra in exchange for a decrease in strength. So adamantium-based techniques are very specific and suitable for many situations. The main thing is to learn how to handle it and understand the basics. From his training, Shikamaru acquired only basic techniques for creating liquid metal and simple structures. He has not yet reached the creation of weapons and spears, since he was busy with adamantium and a simple understanding of transformations. For all metals, techniques such as creating bullets and spears, small buildings and shields, hand seals are universal, only the metal and the composition of the chakra were different. Acquired, use in battle until it really works. Except, perhaps, adamantium. Shikamaru was able to master the spears and the protective dome, and also received several ideas on how to combine these techniques. Otherwise, if you need to create something, you had to think for yourself and create jutsu yourself. The basis was already there, then you need to act in accordance with the rules. But that was what Shikamaru was counting on. It is much preferable for him to create himself, because he was in no hurry to go anywhere. Strength is needed, but if he was so obsessed with it, he would have acquired the Mangeki Sharingan long ago. With his current body, Shikamaru was more than confident in his ability to resist blindness. In addition, the glasses allowed. But he was in no hurry yet, as soon as he figured out the basics. In any case, there was no one to test his eyes on, and the chance to awaken Mangeki could appear suddenly. Naturally, this is unlikely, but there is no need to rush. Having the ability to fight Kakashi and win, even though he did not fight seriously, is already a completely different level. For a 10-year-old boy, this is a very good feat. Liquid metal turned out to be another good metal acquisition. This is generally one of the best techniques in this element. And this is more likely not a technique, but just another form of transformation, which does not freeze over time due to the measured introduction of the chakra. The only difference was in the amount of chakra for certain types of metals. Mass application due to the liquid state. It involved more of the elemental component of fire than lightning. This type of metal was more suited precisely to the transformation of the chakra itself into elements, rather than the surrounding resources. There was no need to talk about the danger of liquid metal for the enemy. A wave of mercury will be no less dangerous than a pure spit of the elements of lava. In some ways, even more dangerous. All of this is just the beginning, from exploding liquid metal clones to all metal structures, which in a moment can revert to a liquid form. There are a lot of applications, everything already depends on the fantasy of the owner of the element. Then Shikamaru tried to test the golems. But, as it turned out, this jutsu is not so easy to apply. For the first time in his life, something didn't work out right away as he recognized the seals and the correct chakra distribution. Of course, except for the first training sessions with my father. In the future, Shikamaru was given everything very simply. This time, the techniques of golems, ranging from wood to metal, simply did not work. Only the chakra wasted was striking, so he decided to postpone this training for now. It was not even worth talking about the transformation of Buddha and so on. Growing a tree or creating a piece of iron is clearly much easier. Then he tried to alloy metals, but after a couple of unsuccessful attempts, he also put it off for now. Then he proceeded to the snake dance, a rather interesting ninjutsu, which was partly also kenjutsu. Its essence was very simple. The user creates a metal whip that resembles a long sword in shape, but at the same time is as flexible and light as a rope. As a result, in order to master this technique, it is important not only to master liquid metal transformation, but also to be able to maintain this state for a long time. Shikamaru coped with this, but he did not really succeed in applying the dance in practice. The first attempt turned into that very sword whip, but Shikamaru did not get the ability to control it. Therefore, the first jerk of this rope cut down several nearby trees and flew behind and cut down trees there as well. In general, it was still necessary to catch the balance and develop the skill. So Shikamaru put this weird sword style on hold for now. It was very impressive, but without proper training, it can only be used to the detriment of yourself and others. After finishing with the metals and dealing with the toxic remains, Shikamaru rested for a couple of hours, replenishing a little chakra, and then began to practice the elements of storm and wood. Having created 36 clones, he turned to them and ordered, "Fight." Without further ado, the clones were equally divided, and then went out alternately against each other using the learned jutsu. So far, quite a few hand seals have had to be folded, so some techniques may still not be so easy to use in battle. But this is not critical. Any Shinobi still in the academy learn to quickly fold hand seals. In addition, it was for the sake of learning that these tests of new techniques were passed. Checking the destructive potential, using them in certain situations and preparing for a combat situation. Of course, a simple demo is no good here, but this is just the beginning. You need to practice the technique more than 100 times to learn at least a little and get used to the seals and chakra distribution. Shikamaru has recently mastered the individual elements, so the new transformations of the enhanced and expanded genomes are still not so easy for him. In addition, there is still not so much chakra, even after the moment of restoration. So this kind of training needs to be cranked for several more days, and maybe months. The storm was resisted by woody structures and then vice versa. This element has proven to be quite useful at medium range due to its specific properties. Yes, and in battle on the far side was quite suitable. The storm's conductance and control proved to be slightly better than the furious lightning. Usually, to make lightning flow smoothly, and even direct it just the highest level of mastery of the element, here the storm has already received ease of handling thanks to the release of water. Moreover, storm can interact even in the weather and use the environment in battle. Battles on the water or in rainy weather will be of great help to the owner of the genome. Even if you don't introduce yourself to rain, it can always be invoked with the same ability. Basically, all of the storm ninjutsu came down to attacks with charged attacks from a distance, because this was one of the main advantages. Next is wood release. Here, the basics are natural, managing the growth of trees and changing their own cells along with chakra. Shikamaru had already checked the world of trees during his attempts to create a golem and then he wasted a lot of chakra on it. Now it was worth fixing everything. Trees can be grown anywhere, it is only important to use the chakra and introduce it into the ground or onto certain surfaces. The main thing is that there should be at least some rudiments of plants. It is natural not to grow a tree just from a chakra, because it is not an extended genome. But this is quite possible using your own cells. For example, tree clones are created. The chakra of the owner of the element, one might say, is more saturated with vitality, and it is precisely because of it that all the user's cells change so much. Simply put, the chakra changes the entire body, and this happens due to several circumstances: senju's lineage and wood release. Only together these two forces can truly reveal each other. That is why DNA embedded in other people are not able to reveal the true powers of the wood release and the terrifying regenerative abilities of Hashirama. Only these two abilities bring each other into strength while maintaining balance. Simply put, if you take Hashirama's DNA and transplant it to yourself, a person will receive some of the regenerative abilities and the elemental skill of managing the growth of trees. But, in the end, these are just side abilities. Hashirama's true strength is not in his senju bloodline or in the elements, but in how these two forces together changed his body, creating a new strength. It is impossible to adopt. With such a person you can only be born and later awaken. This is what makes the first Hokage unique. Such uniqueness can only be compared with the Uchiha possessing the eternal Mangeki Sharingan. Now there is also Shikamaru, thanks to a number of circumstances, and he received such power, while his genes are even more unique due to many other bloodlines. But naturally he could not get the Asura's reincarnation chakra. At least that's the way it should be. After all, his ancestry did not relate to the bloodline, but rather related to the basic abilities of a certain kind. In any case, wood release techniques are very useful. Tree clones are very resilient and can serve as ideal spies and even traps. With one such clone, you can communicate at a distance and turn them into completely harmless transmitter seeds. The method of creation is a bit complicated, but when Shikamaru succeeded, he glanced at his copy and nodded in satisfaction. I wonder if you try this. By the power of thought, Shikamaru easily established a connection and easily examined all the accumulated memories of the clone. There were not many of them. He was created nothing at all, but the ability to follow someone from a distance was impressive. Unfortunately, the clone did not copy the circulation system, so the dojutsu would be able to identify the fake, but this is just a minor issue amid all the benefits. Shikamaru immediately began to think about the use of transmitter seeds. If it can be reduced, how much? Is it possible to force the swallowed seed to enter the victim's brain? With a satisfied grin, Shikamaru nodded. Thought is sane. Pure control right in the brain is not the same as simple genjutsu. It is quite possible to use the special jutsu of control thanks to such seeds. Plus, I remember being able to drain chakra. Thus, you can create a kind of parasite that slowly kills the victim. In villages without dojutsu, it is simply a lethal weapon of mass destruction. 100 trees, 100 clones hidden in fruit, and 100 infected bodies. A terrible jutsu, if you really create it, of course. This is not to mention how you can interact with senjutsu chakra through tree cloning. Although, it will take a lot of chakra, perhaps even for me. With a scowl, Shikamaru once again examined his copy. It seems that creating a clone based on our own cells and purely from wood, different techniques. The first case is very unique for someone like Hashirama and my genes. Other owners of Mokuton are perhaps only able to raise trees and make a purely elemental copy. Transform a tree from soil into a clone or your own cells into the same copy. There are definitely differences. To create something from cells is almost to create a copy of itself, and this is inherent exclusively in Hashirama, now also to me. Probably, the clones of Yamato and Madara were different, because if their cells regenerated so quickly and had so much vitality, they would not be weaker than Hashirama. Naturally, in terms of the body and only wood techniques, Madara is very strong even without them. Yamato, on the other hand, could not compare in many ways, even with his genes. This directly speaks in favor of the correctness of my theory. From new discoveries, Shikamaru interrupted the flow of information. Several clones were dispersed en masse. Having received their memories, the guy immediately nodded contentedly. An attempt to use the birth of the world of trees naturally turned out to be successful, but the costs of chakras are quite impressive. Fatigue was not weak. In general, not surprisingly, today he had to check new jutsu more than once, so the waste turned out to be quite adequate. A simple jonin from such loads would have died 100 times already. Although, Naruto could have lasted twice as long as Shikamaru. You need a little more control for the techniques and then everything will become easier. This will cut waste by at least half, or even more. Then there is only experience, only it needs to be stuffed. After practicing with the element of wood for about an hour, Shikamaru has already spent most of the chakra. It will take some time to recover, so he decided to continue on the path. Now it was already possible to return to the road and walk by the usual route. The Bakugan check revealed no surveillance, which means you can relax a bit. If anyone is peeping from the shadows, it is not so important. As long as he possesses such strong powers of stealth, it is his merit, there is nothing you can do about it. But, Shikamaru was completely sure that he was alone here, so he could allow himself to relax a little. There is a long way ahead. 2 years of travel is not such a short time. During this time, it was worthwhile to implement some plans and prepare for future problems. ******. A few hours later, in the city of Shukuba. The journey turned out to be quite short. Even without haste, Shikamaru reached the hotel town fairly quickly. In fact, after Kakashi fell behind, one could go straight to the mission. But, Shikamaru decided to visit this town and get hold of some information. He may not have left the village all this time, but he remembered several useful places for collecting data. In the Land of Fire, the hotel town of Shukuba was just such a place. Plus, unofficially, Shikamaru bought a small restaurant here. Shinobi usually do not do this, which, of course, surprised the guy every time. With their capabilities, the ninja did not want to get rich at all and only relied on tasks, and this is too strange. In general, before it was reasonable due to constant wars. Yes, and Shinobi are not masters of doing business, but still, everyone is quite capable of having a couple of enterprises and ordinary people under his command. Because it's strange that they didn't do that. There were no special laws prohibiting such business in the villages. Rather, Shinobi did only what they were trained to do. Anyway, Shikamaru bought this restaurant without any distant plans. In the past, he had an idea to establish a business, but with endless resources in the form of the release of wood and metal, there was no particular need for something. In any case, it makes no sense for a normal Shinobi to build an integral business on his own. The same Gato, with his disgusting name, is just a small man and against even Genin no more than a small rat. His life is essentially worthless. Experienced Jonin can quite easily make him obey or even turn him into a puppet. Therefore, a wise ninja manipulates from the shadows, and not an experienced one does such simple things as business. This used to make sense, since Shikamaru wanted to acquire information from the outside world, as well as an understanding of the structure of the country and how things are done here. And the money for a 6-year-old child was definitely not superfluous. Now, with his abilities, all this power is just child's play, and money is useless pieces of paper. Perhaps that is why ninjas do not meddle in people's affairs, because there is not so much benefit from this, rather more harm. It is much more interesting to control daimyo and thousands of mortals. One has only to think about how ordinary people can be useful, and a number of their useful applications will immediately open. Their use and resources in the form of vitality, souls and ingredients for pills. Naturally, we are not talking about all people, here we can only single out criminals, of whom there are thousands in this world. For a simple geinin, having 1,000 souls or a daimyo puppet doesn't really mean anything. Indeed, on the scale of the ninja world, the power of the daimyo is simply ridiculous, but in the world of ordinary people, he is an important shot. In the hands of a knowledgeable person, even the souls of mere mortals can turn into a terrible weapon. Shikamaru, for example, had a forbidden technique for which souls are important, and here the benefits of controlling mortals show themselves in all their glory. In any case, he has not really thought about it yet. Now the first goal is important. The poisonous Shinobi must be eliminated before he fled to another city and disappeared into the shadows. This ninja was just an example of that knowledgeable using the resources of ordinary people. He probably didn't kill them for fun. Naturally, if he's not crazy. With a quiet creak, the door opened to a small building with a pair of windows. The red roof, grey walls, and a small sign said Hataru's restaurant. Actually, Hataru was the owner of this place until a typical case for every world happened, sabotage, and after the threat and extortion, they overtook the owner of the establishment. Richer rivals decided to build on the site of his family restaurant another brothel, of which there are already almost a dozen in Shukuba. In these places, almost all the main businessmen of the Land of Fire were sharing. The simple old man could hardly resist them. At that moment, the people of Shikamaru appeared. More than 3 years ago, he was able to establish contact with several criminal gangs and acquire his own guard of caravans. In the Land of Fire, protecting your own goods and enterprises is not at all meaningless. In any case, although they were not Shinobi, they did their job. Shikamaru had been out of business for a long time, as he considered it a waste of time. He had his own representative, who was not at all averse to making extra money and becoming the face of the business. Now only he was responsible for everything, naturally still being a subordinate. Trying to give a ninja is a very stupid thing to do, so Shikamaru didn't bother at all. He not only did not care about the small trades of this person, but the whole business as a whole. Of course, he was not at all opposed to expanding the network among ordinary mortals, but if only someone else would do it. Creating a couple of puppets like Gato is the most he could do for his past-earning hobby. In general, the representative took care of all the business and sometimes sent a report to Shikamaru, so he found out about the purchase of this place. Several hand seals and a dozen clones are ready, then in a moment they reincarnated into beautiful women and scattered throughout the city. At the same time, Shikamaru decided to have a snack. With a barely noticeable creak, the door to Hataru's restaurant opened. The guy disappeared inside and immediately looked around. Quite an ordinary place, 3 tables by the window, a small bar and an aged woman at the checkout. On the other hand, there are 3 more tables by the window, right there, at the very end, a strange guy with a straw hat was sitting and sipping coffee. He looked suspicious, but he didn't look like a shinobi. In any case, Shikamaru had no intention of wasting his time on any secretive individuals. He went to the bar and ordered pancakes. The place was empty, but the silence did not bother Shikamaru at all, he just wanted to have dinner and have a quiet time. The reincarnated beauties should do just fine. If you speed up on the way, then he won't even lose time to the border town. It's a pity I don't have hypnosis. I think the Sharingan is capable of that. And Manjeki, probably, should be bought somehow. Yes, there are enough cases. But, the element of wood impressed me. Sipping juice, the guy slowly ate pancakes. At this time, several more visitors came to the restaurant. The smiling woman took another order, the suspicious person at the window continued to read his book, and more pleasant smells from the kitchen awakened appetite. At the same time, the first clone dissipated and Shikamaru nodded contentedly. Tsunade means. And why am I not surprised? She attracts attention with her antics. There was not much in the information received. First of all, Tsunade Senju has been having a mess in Shukuba for a couple of days now. There are many gambling houses in which the famous Senju is very well known not only for her luck, but also for her hot temper. A couple of days ago, for example, she beat a dozen men drunk. This did not surprise the locals at all. Naturally, no one in their right mind was going to cross her path. Yeah, the legendary Sannin and their special hobbies. I wouldn't mind getting to know each other, but I think it's not the time yet. On the way back, I might drop by. I'm almost in the wrong direction. You can go through the hot springs to the land of water. Maybe you can get some information about the tailed beasts. It is preferable to find Isaba. I would like to test my sealing skills. My technique is not perfect yet, but if everything works out as I plan, I can even contain the three tails and get some of his chakra. It's a pity I have no information about the beast. With a frown, Shikamaru finished the pancakes, and after a while the rest of the clones dispersed. After paying, the guy left the restaurant. Well, the place is good, the food here is not bad. Lighting a cigarette, Shikamaru trudged further into the city. At this time, it was already beginning to get dark. Hundreds of lights of hotels and brothels gave this city an indescribable atmosphere. Couples wandering all over the place, sometimes not quite sober, amused Shikamaru a little, and then he left this place. There was enough information. In the neighboring countries and cities, everything is calm, nothing remarkable and requiring attention has not happened. Several renegades showed up, but not a word about Akatsuki or anything else. Although a drunkard saw Jiraiya in the city of Kishi, at least the description of the hermit was very suitable. White hair, a strange disposition, a scroll behind his back and a great attraction to beautiful women. The description is detailed and the image popped up in my head. But, Shikamaru did not attach any importance to this. He was not yet worried about meeting the Sannins, not one of them. With Orochimaru, for sure. Alone and with a good drink, Shikamaru continued his quiet journey. Bonfires under the moonlight, stargazing, daytime fishing, training and of course booze. Day after day he got closer and closer to the city of Tumru. After a week, he finally reached his goal. At the same time, in the forests outside the city, hidden in an underground shelter, a Shinobi was conducting an experiment on another victim. In a dark room, barely lit by candles, his dark silhouette was visible. Thin and pale, in a black mask with a sewn-up mouth, in an eerie cloak with a green skull on the back. Death smelled from this man, and the nasty smell of rot and burning in the room could drive even experienced murderers into a stupor. There were several huge capsules against the walls of the room, filled to capacity with a strange green liquid. It seemed as if this substance even glowed. Nearby was a cage with several charred bodies. Smoke was still spreading from them and a faint hiss was barely heard. Already dead, but the poison continued to eat away at their flesh and even bones. No one knows exactly how many he has already managed to kill in the course of his experiments. The one who created all this continued to fold hand seals, bending over the body of a swarthy woman. She was still breathing, but apparently unconscious. 2 force were attached to her body and the green fluid slowly entered her bloodstream. After folding a dozen seals, the man growled. Merging. Slapping on the woman's chest, he immediately stretched out his hand and lifted her eyelid. A minute later, the Shinobi sighed in disappointment. Failure again. Expected. Well, maybe that will do. With a disgruntled look, the man took off his mask, revealing a terribly disfigured face with burns. Whitened eyes, missing nose and ears, disfigured lips and neck with some strange holes from which pipes with green liquid extended somewhere under clothes. Leaning over the woman's face, the man folded a couple of hand seals and opened his mouth. At the same moment, her body arched, cracked, and then began to decompose right before our eyes. But, no sooner had it turned into a mush, than the suction force from the man's mouth pulled everything into his huge mouth. There was nothing left, an empty couch and blackened blood slowly flowing to the floor. The stones on the floor immediately hissed and slowly began to decompose. Hope you like the video. This is the most up-to-date version of the web novel, and if it get updated in future I will make a update this series or make a movie about that to continue the story. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Also make sure you tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.